This is a photograph taken by Frank Stewart around 2018 of David Driscoll in his studio in Falmouth, Maine. There becomes this kind of seamless give and take between the artist materials that we see before him as we move from the foreground to the background, and then find David Driscoll amidst these works in progress that are both of figures, trees, architectural shapes, and then just behind the easel and behind David is a window that looks out to a yard, really some of the back gardens of the property in Falmouth, Maine. The studio was his first official studio, really, that he built after purchasing the property in 1961. When David Driscoll curated 2 Centuries of Black American Art, which opened in 1976 at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, one of the introductory sections for that exhibition included a mural-sized photograph blown up of Henry Osawa Tanner in his studio in Paris. In many ways, the use of that photograph can be seen as legitimizing the presence of a Black artist in a studio. And I think it also expresses the connection that Driscoll saw of the studio as a direct line to a professional practice that he was deeply bound to. David Driscoll was born in Eatonton, Georgia on June 7th, 1931. He moved to Ellenboro, North Carolina in Western Appalachia at the age of 5 and grew up in North Carolina until he set off for college, and that was Howard University in Washington, D.C., where he became a student of James A. Porter, who was both an artist and a scholar, just as David Driscoll would come to be. One of the things that happened while he was an undergraduate at Howard was he was awarded a summer residency for the Skowhegan School of Art and Sculpture in rural Maine. And he spent the summer there in 1953 after his junior year. David Driscoll married Thelma DeLoach while he was still an undergraduate at Howard University. From Howard, he becomes a professional educator at Talladega. David won a painting prize from the 1959 Clark Atlanta Annual. And the photograph we see, David and Thelma and his 2 daughters, Daphne and Doreen, looking at the painting that won the prize, Young Pines Growing. I look at it and I think about how young they look. That here was already an accomplished educator, artist, father. He's 27 years old. While at Talladega, he begins to take his MFA at the Catholic University of America, which he completes in 1962. And after that, he moves back to Washington, D.C. to become a professor at Howard University. So these things overlap. His purchase of the Falmouth, Maine property and beginning to make a summer home for the family there. Maine had made such an impression on David Driscoll when he was at Skowhegan in 1953, both as a place, a landscape, a domain, and an environment of importance, but also as a place where artists go. I have always felt that David Driscoll's studio was a spirit house. And when I say studio, I'm including the extended domain of planted gardens, flowers, trees that pretty much nestle up around the studio itself, such that when I think about David Driscoll's practice as an artist, what I came to know, it was this seamless relationship between the nature that existed outside and the artwork that took place in the studio. There's a constant communication with the natural world. If we were to think about the Maine studio in comparison with the Maryland studio, which came online later in life, situated in the city of Hyattsville, you still would find some of the same quintessential Driscoll features. You would find common objects, old typewriters, chairs that are functional and chairs that were not so functional. They became part of the built environs or the aesthetic environment that he surrounded himself with, that then became part and parcel of the visual work that he produced for us. You will also find African masks there. David began his first journey to the continent of Africa in December of 1969. In fact, he was there over Christmas. There's a beautiful journal diary that he created in which he is thanking Thelma, his wife, and his two daughters for allowing him the privilege to be away at Christmas. David Driscoll began to incorporate African art much more cohesively, and especially masks, which for him represent a spirit of the ancestor. He always had a penchant for experimenting. He often spoke about learning color theory from Lois Mailou Jones, learning watercolor from her, but preferring opaque, which would be gouache, as opposed to transparent watercolor. He also was introduced to magnet acrylic by Leonard Beaucourt at Skowhegan when he was an undergraduate. But acrylics for David Driscoll dried too fast. He liked to work on things day after day. He would make his own inks. He loved sepia and began to make his own walnut ink. And as a way of extending that, began to think about the older traditions of pokeberry, which is a bright purplish berry, which was used for dyes in the past. So David began to experiment with those, and he would make walnut and pokeberry dyes. He often told this joke about wanting his mother to teach him to quilt, and his mother saying, "No, boys don't quilt." But in fact, he found a way around it and did quilt. But he also returned to this idea of strip cloths, which he would dye almost like tie-dye. There's a fabulous work in the collection of the National Gallery called Peak and Plain that was done in 1980 while David had a residency at Yaddo in Saratoga Springs, New York. He began to experiment with combining materials. There's Yorba Post at the Baltimore Museum of Art, Upward Bound at the High Museum of Art. Peak and Plain is one of the few objects in which he has actually incorporated cheesecloth into the composition. How can he make a painting tactile like a quilt? How can he create a surface that isn't flat, but at the same time adheres to modernist principles? In many ways, David Driscoll's forte was taking the modernism of art that he learned, that he was trained in, and wedding it to a kind of aesthetic that was experimental and Southern and of his own vision. David was the best storyteller. He was the best chronicler of his own life. Those who had the opportunity to listen to him and be around him know this. He would say that the importance of storytelling is very much rooted to the South. And he would then also point to Bearden, Romary Bearden, who was a colleague, a mentor of sorts, a friend. And Bearden's own interest in storytelling, Southern folklore, creating images that spoke to a narrative of Southern traditions. What I find really compelling, however, is that Driscoll's own artwork, individual works of art, they're not particularly narrative. In fact, they're iconic. They're symbolic representations that give us remembrances of things that he held dear. The relationship of David Driscoll's iconic representations to a Byzantine art form, of which David Driscoll was actually quite interested. He loved Byzantine mosaics. This iconic imagery that becomes mesmeric, that keeps us within the image itself, that endows it with a particular kind of spirit, that is the essence of the encounter. And an encounter at that point is much more, I think, an explanation of what he gifts us as an artist. That's different from what he gives us as a storyteller. When he was teaching at Howard, he had a fellowship to study in the summer in the Netherlands. And he was incredibly impressed by the Art Historical Institute in The Hague, which had kept all of these clippings and record files of every Dutch artist. It just astounded him that the nation had taken such care to chronicle professional artistic practices. He had a vision that he would do that for African American artists. When you read some of his correspondence, which is part of the Driscoll papers at the Driscoll Center, you will see David telling other artists to keep their own archives. He understood the significance of that, the poignancy of his own archiving practices as a tradition he saw being practiced for Dutch artists ever since really the Renaissance and the so-called Dutch Golden Age, that he wanted to do that for Black artists and began to do that at Fisk and did it for his own practice, which then he extended by the gift to the University of Maryland at College Park, gives us an enormous opportunity to think about the ways in which archival practices around Black artistic practice are also significantly shaping the field and the knowledge of American art. One of the controversial aspects of 2 centuries of Black American art at the time, and arguably for some people today, was the inclusion of Audubon, John James Audubon, in the exhibition itself. For Driscoll, whose own scholarship and research at the time was following up on the possibility that Audubon himself would have been designated as Black in America following racial designations of the time. He wanted to highlight that in 2 centuries of Black American art. It was something that he had learned about early on as a student when he was at Howard. Kerry James Marshall has recently created a series of works called Black and Part Black Birds in America, which pay homage to the inclusion of Audubon in 2 centuries of Black American art. The controversy itself is part of Kerry James Marshall's interest in thinking about how 2 centuries of Black American art becomes a canon-shaping exhibition that touches on all of the difficult ways in which race is configured and the way we talk about it from 1976 and before to even today. And this notion of Black and part Black, right? Blackbirds that are Black and part Black. What is part Black, right? So it is a really poignant recognition that 2 centuries of Black American art as a formative exhibition was also laying the groundwork for splitting open some of these conversations that we need to have in America. We are all looking forward to a survey of his work that will open in February of 2021. David Driscoll, Icons of Nature and History, opens at the High Museum in Atlanta, the state in which he was born. It then moves to Portland, Maine, the state that he made his home. And then it goes to the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C., a space that had already been a home for Driscoll from his early days at Howard as an undergraduate student. This exhibition, which includes about 60 objects with a focus on his practice as a painter, an artist who trained in conventional practices that were Eurocentric, who understood American painting, who was tremendously moved by African art and the ancestral impulse that he saw in African art. And then an artist tied to Southern roots. Exhibitions, including this one, are one of the markers of a lifetime of joy and beauty. The way that he understood the significance of the creative practice was very much connected to the sense of the divine, that the creative act is a connection to a divine. Nature, too, was connected to the divine because nature brought us nourishment and joy and beauty. There was a saying that he would use from an Old Testament psalm written by King David, right? So we can laugh and think about David as King David. He was certainly a king for us in many ways. And the line that he would quote is, "Joy cometh in the morning." And he referred to that in many ways, that the studio practice, that sacred space, brought joy, but it came out of the turmoil of finding the right form. I would like to close by reading from a journal notation that was written by David Driscoll in 2009. Art is one of those places where human beings satisfy their souls, resting their spirit in the hallowed halls of beauty. Nothing is nearer to the divine than that which comes from the hand, the mind, the sound, and the motion of our spiritual contact with the great Creator's will to let us share form in so many ways. That's the Driscoll that we know. The great Creator shares the ability to create form in so many ways.